one day I found myself in your website in the list of suspected Sentientists, which I can say, well, probably you're right.
Yeah, it was a good guess. So we've upgraded you since. Yeah.
So why did you do that website? What was the idea? Just to show to the world and to vegans in particular, look, you actually are a sentientist, whether you know it or not. Welcome to Walking with Vegans to Get Tea, where I, Jordi Casamitjana, walks with another vegan somewhere in the UK, and we get some tea somewhere later on. And I'm in St James Park in London, and today I will be walking with Jamie Woodhouse, which has happened to be here. Hello, Jamie.
Hey, good to see you again, Jordi.
Yeah, good to see you.
Let's walk.
Right, so this is Walking with Vegan. That means we have to do several things. The first thing we have to do is walk.
Yeah, we tick that box.
We're doing that. So now we have to establish that we are vegan. So as I'll start. So yeah, I am vegan. I have been vegan since the 1st of January 2002. And I went straight from meat eater to vegan. I was already working in animal protection for 5 years. I'm one of those that entered veganism through the animal rights gateway, but I was still having this huge contradiction of trying to protect some animals and then eating where others. But eventually I became a vegan. So that's my journey. So what's your story?
Yeah, so I'm a newer vegan and my journey was quite long and painful. I wish it had been quicker, but I guess I started out, like a normal person, caring about at least some animals as a kid. We had a dog Erin as part of our family, and she really was a family member. Caring maybe less about some other animals, but not thinking consistently about it at all. And my sister probably led the way, really, because she was starting to think about the ethics of these things. That led me to go vegetarian when I was about 22, 23. And it was for ethical reasons, but I guess I just didn't carry those ethical reasons all the way through. There were still some facts I didn't want to look at. I was thinking about how weird could I handle being socially. And at that point in my life, with the friends and family and work colleagues around me, vegetarianism was about as far as I could go. But then I deliberately stopped myself thinking more deeply. And it's only in the last, maybe 7 or 8 years. I know I'm supposed to remember the date, but it's about 7 or 8 years ago then. I guess I put the philosophy I already had in my head into practice as a vegan.
Right, because you and I, we have had conversations before, so we have been interviewing each other in different formats.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard about you is when you approached me to interview me about Sentientism.
Yeah.
Because that is how I associate you. I associate you with that word, Sentientism, which is an interesting concept I didn't really quite know before I met you. Now I know a bit more about it. But now most people out there will have no idea what I'm talking about. So you need now to explain what Sentientism is.
Of course. Well, in a way, it's the reason I'm vegan. So for me, my veganism is quite a fundamental part of the way I think, but it's not right at the bottom. At the bottom for me, and for most people, is your worldview. It's the deepest foundations of how you think about reality, working out what's true, working out what's real, but also the big ethical questions of what matters and who matters. And my journey to Sentientism partly came through my frustration with the other worldviews available. So a lot of people say, well, what do you mean by a worldview? Well, some good examples might be religious worldviews like Buddhism, Islam, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, there's a long list. Or non-religious worldviews like humanism, which says that we don't have a faith-based way of thinking, but we don't need a God to be good, we can still care about human rights, and maybe further beyond that. But in the portfolio of different sort of worldview options, I didn't find any that really fit me, because I don't really have much of a spiritual or a faith-based or a supernatural way of thinking about the world. I like something that's more science-based or evidence and reason-based. And so many of the worldviews seem very centered on humans. Not exclusively, they always have some suggestion of how we can care more broadly about non-humans, but the center of gravity for most of the worldviews was quite focused on humans. So that led me to borrow this word sentientism out of 1970s academia. It's not a term I came up with. And then try and broaden it into a worldview that you could put alongside Islam, Christianity, humanism, and sentientism would be another choice. So in one line, I'd summarize it as evidence, reason, and compassion for all sentient beings. So when we're thinking about how to work out what's true, what's real, the nature of this amazing, weird reality we'll share, use evidence, reason, intellectual humility, curiosity, open-mindedness, never dogmatism, always being willing to change your mind. And on the ethical side, it's quite open about whether we think about rights or utility or a feminist care ethic or any other type of ethical system, but it does insist that every sentient being, at least, should matter and should matter seriously.
So it's all about sentient beings then. So
yeah, but so I would say the ethical side is centered on making sure all sentient beings get included seriously as we think about moral stuff, but it's also, the technical term for it is epistemology. It's also about how should we understand reality.
Yeah. So would it be right to say that somehow Sentientism is the union between veganism and humanism? Is that simplification?
I think that's not far off. Humanism itself does leave the door open for non-human animal ethics. So there are many humanists who will use their rational ethics and extend them generously to non-human animals. So that door is open to humanists already, and there are many humanist vegans who I would say are also sentientists. So that does tie together well. But there are still some differences between sentientism and humanism, sentientism and veganism that go beyond that intersection.
Right,
but that's not a bad starting point. It's
let me give you a test. So we're just passing by the guards, these horse guards.
Yeah.
So we can see it over there, which is where once a year they have all these seats here now, because there's going to be a spectacle where people on a horse dressed in colors and from the army, they will show to the public how well they dominate a sentient being 3 or 4 times bigger than them. And they feel very proud and everybody will applaud. And for us vegans, that is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And we are against. So would the sentientist like yourself also be covering things like that and have the same view that the vegan will have on horses and things?
It would, because if we think about, sentientism talks about having compassion for all sentient beings or moral consideration for all sentient beings. And that being a serious moral consideration. It can't be a tokenistic thing. It's something you have to put into practice. And an interesting way of thinking about it is, what's the minimum you should expect? If someone said they have consideration for you or compassion for you or they want you to be treated humanely, what's the minimum you should be able to expect? And I would suggest that minimum should be, you would expect not to be exploited, harmed or killed without a really strong overriding justification. I mean, even within veganism, there can be justifications for causing harm. But I think that's what these words need to mean. And we should not let the meaning of words like humane and compassion and caring be eroded. We have to stand up at least for that minimal baseline. And hopefully we go beyond it as well. We go into benevolence and helping and, doing more than just avoiding the negative, into helping positively too. But in short, because veganism is a philosophical, practical stance against exploitation, harm and killing of any animal, that to me is a quite direct implication of even a minimal level of compassion or moral consideration. So that's a long answer. The short answer is yes.
Yeah, I get it. So for me, I guess I am a sentientist too, because I am a vegan, so I apply all the ethical considerations for all sentient beings, and I'm one of those vegans that follow the official definition of veganism, the Vegan Society, and I interpret animals as all animals, including humans, and even those that we haven't discovered yet, because animals obviously don't exist only when we discover them. So even if we don't know anything about it, I believe in this axiom of veganism, which I call it the second axiom of animal sentience. It says we should treat all animals as sentient beings, regardless of how much we know of their sentience.
At least to be prudent and careful.
And also, I am not religious. I'm a rational person. I am a scientist, and I apply logic and common sense. And although you could be vegan for ethical, religious reasons and spirituality, that's not my case. My case was I was already an atheist when I would become a vegan, and then one day I found myself in your website in the list of suspected sentientists, which I can say, well, probably you're right.
Yeah, it was a good guess. So we've upgraded you since.
So why did you do that website? What was the idea, just to show to the world and to vegans in particular, look, you actually are a sentientist, whether you know it or not. Is that the idea?
That's part of the idea. I mean, generally, I think I'd love it if people understood that this worldview existed as an option. So in general, I think people should examine and interrogate their own worldviews. Most of us just accept that we're given to them by our parents or our society or our schools, and we don't really examine or interrogate them. So the most important thing, I think, is just to examine our own worldview, explore loads of others and work out if we're happy with ours or we want to change it. Now, I obviously have a bias because I think Sentientism is a good one, right? So I'd like more people to agree with it. I think it would help make the world a better place. But the deeper thing is just to encourage people to explore. So part of the idea behind the website and the social forums and the YouTube and the podcast is just to normalise the idea, get it out there so that people can look at it and think about it. And part of that normalisation is pointing out that although it's quite a new word, it's based on some very old ideas.
Right.
And quite a lot of people who've never heard of the word already have this way of thinking.
Yeah.
So we have, suspected celebrity sentientists on the page, like you, Billie Eilish, Greta Thunberg.
I'm not a celebrity.
Oh, you're up there. You're definitely up there. Who probably, you've heard the word now, but most of these others haven't heard of it. But they seem to have this way of thinking because they take animal ethics really seriously. They have a sort of naturalistic way of understanding the world that isn't based on, revelation or faith.
Yeah.
So it feels like they fit. So I think a lot more people have this way of thinking, even if they've never heard of the word. So the idea is just to try and normalise it and share the idea and see what people think.
Yeah, I don't have any problem to have more identities added to mine because it's not that they are mutually exclusive.
Oh, no.
I am an environmentalist. I am a vegan. I am Catalan. I am a pro-independence of Catalonia.
Yeah.
I am pro-human rights. All these might have a label or not.
Yeah, if they fit, just keep adding them. That's great. And they can overlap in really important ways.
Yeah.
This isn't some sort of battle of single identities.
Absolutely. And
Religious
for me,
and non-religious worldviews overlap really well.
And it makes sense to embrace them all because they reinforce each other rather than fight against each other.
Yeah,
they give you
absolutely.
different dimensions of the same attitude of doing no harm, trying to help rather than to hinder, trying to respect rather than demand respect from others for any price.
Yeah,
So I agree.
And it's quite an intuitive, almost childlike way of thinking about ethics. Ethics and morality really is about whether and how we care about others, and even a child can see that others aren't just humans.
Right.
You can look into the eyes of a puppy, or you can take a more scientific approach, and you know there is a being there with their own interests, their own feelings, their own perspective, and there's no good reason to exclude them. And 6 and 7-year-olds understand this idea.
Right.
And it fits well in lots of different worldviews. So I run workshops in schools, and sometimes I do that in a religious education classroom. And we have fascinating conversations about how there are interpretations of Christianity that lead you to take non-human animal ethics seriously, of Islam, of course, of ideas like ahimsa in the Dharmic religions. There are really rich, productive areas of overlap where even if we have different ways of thinking about the world, we can come together in solidarity and do this sort of obvious thing of caring about all beings that can feel and that can value themselves.
Absolutely. Well, we are at Trafalgar Square, so you can see Trafalgar Square, famous square in London, because we are now left the park and we are in the middle of the town, of the city, a lot of people walking around. Let's walk before we are cannibalized by tourists, which they do that. And we are going to walk that
Although
way.
tourists are sentient beings as well.
That's right.
We will act with
to
compassion for them.
Yeah. So, and then...
We'll also try not to get run over.
Yeah, I would just... it's okay. And then we're going to go to have some tea to a place called Cream Dream. That is a vegan, obviously, place. It's a cafe, quite peculiar. It's run by Ukrainians that came when the war began. And it's obviously 100% vegan. It's all about cupcakes. It's very stylish, you're going to see. And they have interesting Ukrainian teas, so that we're going to try. So we're going to walk a little bit and just carry on the conversation there. Okay, I think it's here around the corner. Let me double check. Yeah, I can see the pink bit over there.
It's yet another instance of me being embarrassed after being in London for about 30 years. It's a place I didn't know and haven't been to, so thank you for
so many like
bringing me here.
I have the same problem. And then when you learn one, that one closes and there's another one that you haven't heard about. Yeah, here it is. It's all pink. You'll see, pink is the color. It's called Cream Dream. I don't know whether before I said Dream Cream or...
I'm not sure. I think you said Cream Dream. I think you got it right, yeah.
Let's go in there.
No, sei a supoivismo.
So, if you look at the teas, they have
Then na pewno
the green, Ukrainian specialty, but coffee, tea, Vesna, Lito, Austin, Sima. Have you ever heard? Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So we are walking and having some tea. So that's tea time. So we're trying to decide which one. All these teas are
That's the Ukrainian.
the Ukrainian version.
Yep.
Right.
We also do have the tea, which is not on the menu yet. That's the grandma tea,
Right.
which is the rose, raspberry, blackberry, and cherry. And that's as well the herbal tea, which our owner, the grandma, she's collects all the things from her garden in Ukraine.
I think we have to try that.
We need to have that one.
Cool.
So can we have it in a pot?
Yeah, of course.
And then
For 2
we,
cups?
yeah, and we get go start.
No
So
problem.
are you going to bring it?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll do.
So we'll wait for you to come.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. Here we go. Now,
And just in case anyone's wondering, Crimea is Ukraine.
yeah. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
Delicious, straight from the grandmother's back garden.
Absolutely. Sentient beings.
Yes.
Let's talk about sentient beings because Sentientism has this word sentient beings and everybody uses this word sentient beings, but probably not everybody understands the same meaning of sentient being. So, how Sentientism interprets what a sentient being is. So,
Yeah. So the common sense way that I think even a 6-year-old understands is actually comes from the Latin definition. It comes from the word sentire, which means to feel. So any being that can feel things, anything at all, is a sentient being. Whether something really complex like existential angst or hope or fear or love, or something really basic like pain or pleasure, then you are a sentient being. So there's a more technical definition, which is the capacity for valenced experience, which basically means if you have experiences and they can either be good or bad in any way whatsoever, then that is sentience.
yeah, for me, which is very close, the definition I use is any creature that has the capacity to have positive or negative experiences, and could be neutral as well, but at least positive or negative,
Yeah.
and act on them for the benefit of that individual, either if it's a negative moving away or if it's positive getting closer. And to do that, you require certain things. You require senses to be able to perceive the world, and you require a nervous system to process information. You can just automatically react. You need context. You need when it is right to do it or not and how much, and that's a nervous system. And then you need the ability to do something. That means movement. Either you can move, or you can, if you are fixed in a place, you have some shelves that you can close or open, something that allows you to make a difference, either response towards the positive things or away from the negative things, which is basically the same thing, I believe.
I think so. And I think those reasons are why sentience evolved, because maybe in the Precambrian there were very simple animals who started to be able to feel how they were doing. Am I doing well? Am I doing badly? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? And also to interact with the environment. Can I see a threat? Can I see something dangerous? Can I see some food? And their ability to then move towards good things and move away from bad things, that is the start of sentience. So I think that's why sentience came into being and why we are here now feeling things and experiencing things. But I think there are some quite interesting thought experiments where you can imagine, could you be sentient without the ability to move or without incoming senses? It's a little strange to think about because most of the sentient beings we're aware of, in fact, probably all of them, are animals.
Yeah.
So it fits. But you can do some interesting thought experiments to test that.
I was going to ask this because when the definition of veganism uses the term animal, doesn't really use the term sentient being, the official definition of the Vegan Society. But if you just replace it with sentient being, then you might not be limited to animals. Although all sentient beings, as you said, that we know are animals, we can tell that all animals, almost all, we can discount the sponges that are pre-animals, but if you consider animals that have a bilateral system and have minimum that animals have, then all of them are sentient as far as I'm concerned. But then, of course, that's a planet Earth. What if there is life in another planet? And what if that life obviously develops sentience beyond plants or bacteria?
Yeah.
What about machines can become sentient? So does sentientism embrace all these other types of sentient beings equally?
It's open to them in theory, because if we care about other humans, but not because you're the same species, but because you are a sentient being, and I care about animals, not because they have some biological classification that, Carl Linnaeus or someone dreamed up. The reason I care about animals is because they can feel they're sentient beings. Then I care about their sentience. And if I care about their sentience, then I should care about anyone who is a sentient being, even if they're not an animal, and even if not they're a human. And I think that's one of the interesting things about sentientism as a worldview, is people come into it from all sorts of different directions, but wherever they come from, they find something challenging and something difficult. And I think that's part of the value of it. But one of the irritating things about sentientism is because it's just a basic platform. It doesn't pretend to answer all the questions. It doesn't actually tell us which beings are sentient, so it doesn't list them,
right,
which are in and which are out. It just says, let's use evidence and reason, be prudent, be provisional, be careful.
And of course, if you use evidence,
and if the evidence changes,
sentient individual of any non-animal type might pass the test, whatever test
if a
use.
Venus flytrap starts to show, some more advanced capabilities, or we realize there's maybe an analog of a nervous system we didn't realize, I'm very skeptical of that, but we should be open-minded, right?
Well, you see, it might be difficult for me to imagine a plant that has a nervous system sufficient, but if you look at an ecosystem as a unity where each plant is like an organ, and then you have the fungi like nervous system underneath, connected all the plants and the trees working. I think it's more conceivable to me that an ecosystem might become sentient when you have all these parts that
maybe
all together might actually equate to a nervous system, able to react somehow to the good things and bad things in the environment, although no evidence yet. But that I think is more plausible than the Venus fly plant just by themselves.
I think you might be right. And the trick is, I think it's really good to engage in those sort of edge cases and those thought experiments and those weird situations, as long as they don't distract us from the obvious core case of the quadrillions of obviously sentient beings. We're really confident are sentient and what is happening to them. So it's great to do the fun philosophy, and I enjoy doing that, but they can't be used as a distraction.
Absolutely. Talking about the fun philosophy, let's dwell a little bit more on that. LLMs. Large language models, AI. At one point, one of these LLMs become not just intelligent, better than a human, general intelligence, of course, but sentient. Do you think they have reached that already? Or they might reach it soon?
I don't think they have yet, but there are some quite expert people, cleverer than me, who think it's possible. So there are some really interesting models that bring in expert opinions of different thoughts about what consciousness and sentience really are, and they've assessed the LLMs in various ways, and some of them come up with maybe a 5 to 10% chance that they could be, in some minimal sense, experiencing things now. Now, personally, I'm quite skeptical of that, but I don't see any conceptual reason why some form of computer at some point couldn't become sentient. So I think it's something we need to engage with seriously.
And that might be one of the cases where they might be sentient but not yet able to move.
Yeah, exactly.
They're forced to be like
that's
that.
Partly what I was thinking of. I can imagine, some form of LLM or artificial intelligence that doesn't have all of the biological stuff we're used to that you talked about, with senses coming in and movement and choices that help their survival and reproduction.
Yeah, because
but
obviously
still
could
actually be experiencing something.
The movement is the response.
Yeah.
But for a machine that has been created by somebody else, which is not threatened by something that requires the machine to move away, then there's no requirement to have muscles anymore. But it might be an equivalent of reaction to threat. If somebody threatens the machine to be turned off, what does the machine do? And if it does something different than the other way around, if the machine feels quite comfortable being asked questions, then perhaps we can see this certain element of sentience there. So
perhaps. And it's difficult because when we're thinking about other animals, we have a good evidence base to work from, because you and I share a common evolutionary history, roughly. We have the same sort of architecture. We both have brains and nervous systems that are pretty similar. We might behave and communicate in similar ways. I can talk to you, I can see how I can pinch your hand and see you pull back, right? So those are good lines of evidence that help me be pretty confident that you're sentient. I think you are a sentient being.
Yes.
But you can do that across the whole animal kingdom, even biology, right? You can use those same lines of inference. With artificial intelligences, we don't have that. No. So they don't have a biological history. They're information architecture. What they're doing, the computation, the processing, the patterns, whatever is happening in their minds is very different from ours. And the weird thing about their behavior is that we've trained them to act like a sentient human being, whether or not they are. Right. So when we relate to these beings directly, and you can see this happening on the internet right now.
They can pass the test.
They pass the
by
test.
Fooling us as opposed to being sentient.
So it can pull you in two different directions. It can pull you in a direction of over-attributing sentience when actually they've just been trained to pretend. But there's also a danger we go too far the other way and we just assume they're not sentient. Yeah. When we don't have a total understanding of what our own sentience is yet. So how sure can we be that a computer can't be doing the same thing?
And I think the prudent thing would be to assume they might, even if the evidence is not quite there. As what you do with any new species of animal, vegans, we say, okay, we haven't studied that species, we don't know what they do, but we're going to consider there's a sentient being and we're not going to eat it, we're not going to wear it, we're not going to experiment with it.
You're prudent.
So the same thing should be applied to anything that is not biological, that could become sentient. So I think we should be aware at least of that possibility and be careful. I mean, I've written a couple of articles about veganism and AI recently. There was one I wrote a couple of years ago asking questions to ChatGPT about veganism. They were very interesting. And I went back now with the newest versions, and asked exactly the same questions. And I written an article, which is the second part. And the improvement in the answers were unbelievable. And it was at that point that it almost felt that the LLM, the ChatGPT, wanted to be vegan. Of course, I'm very aware that it knows who I am and therefore it's telling me exactly how I want that conversation go. And nevertheless, I was trying to push I would say it because I don't know the gender.
Maybe them,
or them into a corner, and it was responded positively, and not like a vegan vote, or not even as the standard average human response to veganism. Was more vegan friendly than that. Was more vegan aware than that, and that makes me think, well, I'm actually hopeful that if one day one of these alliances becomes sentient, it might automatically choose the vegan path towards the vegan world, because that's the logical, intellectual solution to environmental problems, human problems, animal problems, health problems, anything that is a global major issue. Veganism is a solution. So a machine designed to find solutions with common sense and all the information is out there ought to arrive to the decision.
You would hope, and they shouldn't struggle from the same cognitive failings that we have. Wishful thinking, biases, failure to resolve cognitive dissonance. But we've trained them on as humans, right? So they are deluded. They do have cognitive biases. We can see that even in the LLMs today. So it's really interesting to work out whether they could be better than us or not, right?
Because
humans are not setting a great baseline, so maybe they could
they
actually be better.
It's like a teacher. If somebody teaching you obviously learn because of the bias of the teacher, but that doesn't mean that you're going to become a replica of the teacher. You rebel, or you think differently, or you talk to another teacher. And I think even if humans are the only source of information, when they start to become intelligent enough to become able to make deductions that are not really based on anything that a human has thought before, just getting independent pieces of information, process them in a way never done before, and then see something new, perhaps that is when it's going to become obvious to them too that the vegan idea is the best idea humanity ever had.
Maybe so. And I think when we're thinking about worrying about them as beings in their own right, I think that's deeply important. There's a philosopher called Thomas Metzinger who suggested a 50-year moratorium on creating new sentient artificial intelligences for that reason, because he's like, they might suffer, we don't understand, and there could be so many of them, right? Because you can copy them and replicate them and across server farms, right? There could be billions, trillions, quadrillions of suffering beings before we even realize. So I think of it almost as a there's these bizarre projects about de-extinction, of bringing extinct species back to life, or you could imagine creating a new species, or even having your own children, right? Before you take that sort of decision, you need to be really confident that you can help them have a decent life. And with digital minds, we have no idea. Right? And we don't, even if they are sentient, what will they actually care about? Right? Because they don't have the biological basis.
Yeah.
So maybe they would, they would live for us pressing the thumbs up on a response, or they would be thrilled by being able to give us an answer. Or would they feel like some sort of modern slave that is just constrained?
Yeah.
It's very hard to understand what their interests might be,
But
even if they are sentient.
Perhaps if they do feel restrained, they do feel oppressed, manipulated, they could empathize with other sentient beings, the animals.
Maybe.
And perhaps they will then discover veganism by themselves, as opposed to listening to the word that vegans have created and put in LLM's training, just realizing, look, there are other creatures like me that they suffer like me, which is basically what humans do when they become vegans. We empathize, we recognize them in us. We see that if we suffer, they can suffer too. And in the column, the shape of the number of legs is irrelevant of that.
Yeah.
So an LLM could actually arrive to the same conclusion and realize, well, you call it vegan, I call it perhaps sentientism, and then make it the universal philosophy for everyone to follow.
Maybe so.